The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long golden rectangles across the polished floor. Travelers hurried in every direction, rolling suitcases, checking phones, sipping coffee. But one girl moved differently. She walked slowly, eyes wide, taking in everything like it was her first time seeing an airport, even though she'd been here plenty. She was 14, with dark brown skin, curly hair pulled into two neat puffballs, and a well-worn sketchbook tucked under her arm like a shield. Beside her strode her father, tall and calm, dressed in a dark suit that looked more like armor than business attire. He carried a small duffel bag over one shoulder and held his daughter's hand lightly, not because she needed it, but because it was their thing, something they'd done since she was little. Today wasn't just any trip. It was a reward. She'd brought home her report card the week before with straight A's, even in algebra, which she'd struggled with all semester. Her father had smiled that quiet, proud smile of his and said, "You've earned something special." And so here they were, business class tickets to Chicago, a city she'd only seen in movies and her own drawings. She'd spent the last 2 nights sketching the skyline from memory, adding little details like steam rising from manholes and people walking dogs along the river. They reached their gate early. The flight wasn't full, and the airline agent at check-in had upgraded them without being asked. Maybe because of the way her father carried himself, maybe just because it was a slow day. Either way, the girl felt a flutter in her chest. Business class meant wider seats, real meals, maybe even a blanket that didn't feel like tissue paper. She couldn't wait to sit by the window and draw the clouds from above. Boarding began, and they were among the first called. As they walked down the jet bridge, her father gently squeezed her shoulder. "Remember," he said, voice low, "you belong here just as much as anyone else." She nodded, though she wasn't sure why he'd said it. Maybe it was just something parents say. She didn't think about it long. She was too busy imagining the view. Inside the plane, the air smelled clean, like lemons and fabric softener. A flight attendant greeted them with a warm smile and directed them to seats 2A and 2B, window and aisle. Perfect. The girl slid into 2A, pressing her forehead against the cool glass for just a second before opening her sketchbook. She already had an idea. A bird flying alongside the plane, tiny but fearless. Her father settled into 2B, stowing his bag and fastening his seatbelt with practiced ease. He pulled out a book, something thick with a plain cover, but didn't open it right away. Instead, he watched his daughter. He'd seen that look before. The focused narrowing of her eyes, the slight tilt of her head as she worked out a line in her mind. She was in her zone, and he loved that about her. Quiet, creative, strong, even when the world tried to make her feel small. A few minutes later, another passenger boarded. She was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a crisp cream blouse and a tailored blazer, pulling a designer carry-on behind her like it was part of her outfit. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she made her way down the aisle. When she reached row 2, she stopped. Her eyes flicked from the girl to the empty seat across the aisle, 2C, and then back again. A tiny frown formed between her eyebrows. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, holding her boarding pass like it might give her an answer. Then, with a sigh that sounded more like a complaint than a breath, she turned and flagged down a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said, voice clipped and polite in that way that wasn't really polite at all. "I was assigned 2C, but is there another seat available? Preferably not near. Well, you see?" The flight attendant, a young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Devon, followed her gaze to the girl who was still sketching, unaware. He hesitated. "Ma'am, that's your assigned seat. Everyone's been seated according to the manifest, but I just—" She lowered her voice, though not enough. "I don't feel comfortable sitting so close. Surely there's someone else you can move." Devon glanced toward the girl's father, who had looked up from his book. His expression hadn't changed, but his posture had, just slightly, like a soldier shifting stance before a storm. "Ma'am," Devon said carefully, "we don't move passengers based on personal preferences like that, especially not when it involves another guest." The woman's cheeks flushed. "It's not about preference. It's about comfort and safety." At that word, safety, the girl finally looked up. She didn't say anything, but her pencil stopped moving. Her eyes darted to her father, then back to her paper, though she wasn't drawing anymore. Her father closed his book slowly. "We're not moving," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space like a bell. Calm. Final. The woman turned to him, startled. "I wasn't talking to you." "You were talking about my daughter," he replied. "So yes, you were." A few nearby passengers turned in their seats. Someone stopped scrolling on their phone. The air in the cabin grew heavier, like before a summer thunderstorm. "I just think the airline should consider," the woman started. "Consider what?" he asked, meeting her eyes evenly. "That a 14-year-old girl drawing in her notebook is somehow a threat? Or that she doesn't deserve to sit in business class because of the color of her skin?" He didn't raise his voice, didn't point or glare, but the words landed like stones in still water rippling outward. The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around as if expecting someone to back her up. No one did. Devon shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, if you'd like to speak with the lead attendant, I can get her." "Yes, please do," the woman said quickly, clutching her boarding pass like a lifeline. As Devon walked away, the woman shot one last look at the girl, long enough to make her shrink back into her seat. Before sitting stiffly in 2C, facing forward, arms crossed, the girl didn't open her sketchbook again. She stared out the window, blinking fast. Her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around it and pulled just a little too hard. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the seat, to be anywhere but here. Her father reached over and gently took her hand, not to say anything, just to hold it, warm, solid, real. After a moment, she squeezed back. Outside, a ground crew member gave the signal. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and steady, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing the flight time to Chicago. Routine words, normal sounds. But inside row 2, everything had changed. The girl finally turned her head. She looked at her father, not with fear but with a question in her eyes. Why did she do that? He didn't answer with words. He just gave her hand another squeeze and nodded toward the window. "Keep looking forward." She took a deep breath and did. The engines hummed to life. The plane began to roll, and as they taxied down the runway, the girl watched the airport shrink behind them, her heart still pounding but her grip on her father's hand steady. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She hadn't done anything wrong, and she wasn't going anywhere. The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing into a sky so blue it looked painted. Clouds drifted below like cotton scattered by a careless hand. Most passengers settled in, adjusting headsets, flipping through magazines, dozing off. But in row 2, the air still felt thick like the calm after a shout that hadn't quite faded. The girl kept her eyes on the window, though she wasn't really seeing the clouds anymore. Her sketchbook lay closed on her lap, her fingers tracing the edge like she was making sure it was still there. She didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of crier. But inside, a quiet storm swirled. Confusion, hurt, a sharp pinch of shame that she knew wasn't hers to carry, yet clung to her anyway. Why didn't she want to sit near me? The question looped in her head, each time heavier than the last. Her father watched her from the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything right away. Sometimes silence was the best thing you could give someone, space to feel what they needed to feel before words could help. He knew that from years of listening, not just as a parent, but as someone who'd spent his life reading people, understanding what wasn't said. Across the aisle, the woman shifted in her seat. She pulled out a glossy magazine but didn't turn the pages. Instead, she kept glancing over, her expression tight like she was waiting for something to happen, or for someone to agree with her. When a flight attendant passed by with a tray of water bottles, she leaned into the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "I spoke to your colleague earlier. I requested a seat change due to discomfort. Has anything been arranged?" The attendant, a woman in her 30s with a calm face and silver studs in her ears, paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I just checked with the lead. There are no open seats in business class, and we can't move passengers without cause." Cause. The woman's voice rose just enough for nearby rows to hear. "I'm a paying customer. I have a right to feel safe." "Safe from what?" A man 2 rows back muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The woman ignored him. "This is unacceptable," she said, turning back to the attendant. "I've flown this airline for years. I expect better treatment." The attendant took a slow breath. Ma'am, everyone on this flight paid for their seat. That includes the young lady next to you. She hasn't done anything. She's just sitting there. Exactly, the woman snapped. And yet I'm expected to sit here feeling uneasy while you do nothing? A few passengers exchanged glances. One woman pulled out her phone and started recording. Not dramatically, just a quiet tilt of the screen toward the aisle. Another man leaned over to his wife and whispered, "This is wild." The girl's father finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "If you're uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why." The woman turned to him, eyes flashing. "Don't you lecture me. You don't know what I've been through." "I don't," he said evenly. "But I do know that blaming a child for your discomfort says more about you than it does about her. That did it." The woman stood up, fast enough that her magazine slid to the floor. "I will not be spoken to like this. I want to speak to the captain, or the airline manager, someone in charge." "You're already speaking to someone in charge," he said, not moving from his seat. "But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to protect my daughter. And right now she's being made to feel like she's the problem just for existing." The girl looked down at her hands. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat felt locked. So instead she opened her sketchbook again. Not to draw the sky, not to draw a bird. She flipped to a fresh page and began sketching the curve of her father's hand on the armrest. Strong, still, unshaken. The lead flight attendant appeared then, older with tired eyes but a steady presence. She'd been briefed. "Ma'am," she said gently but firmly, "I understand you're upset, but we cannot move another passenger because of a personal preference, especially not one that singles out a child based on appearance. That goes against our company policy and basic decency." The woman's face flushed red. "So now I'm racist? Is that what you're saying?" "No one said that," the lead attendant replied. "But your request? It's hard to interpret it any other way." A murmur rippled through the cabin. A teenager in row 5 gave the girl a small thumbs up. An older man nodded slowly, like he'd seen this before and was glad someone was finally saying it out loud. The woman sat back down hard, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. But she wasn't done. Minutes later, as the flight attendants began serving drinks, she flagged one down again. "I'd like a glass of wine, and I'd like it served quickly. I've had quite the ordeal." The attendant handed her a plastic cup without comment. Then, to no one in particular, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear, she said, "Some people think money buys them the right to sit wherever they want. But class isn't just about your ticket. It's about how you carry yourself." The girl flinched. Her pencil snapped. Her father reached over and took the broken pencil gently from her fingers. He didn't look at the woman. He just pulled a fresh one from his jacket pocket, one he always carried for her, and placed it in her hand. Then he leaned close, voice barely above a whisper. "You're not what she says you are. You're kind. You're smart. You're enough. And none of this changes that." She nodded, blinking fast. She started drawing again. Not her father's hand this time, but a shield. Simple, round, strong. In the center, she wrote one word, enough. Meanwhile, the woman kept talking, to herself, to the air, to anyone who might listen. "I just don't understand why airlines don't have better protocols. What if something happened? What if she—" She stopped, catching herself, but the implication hung there like smoke. A man in row 3 finally turned around. "Lady, your what-ifs are hurting a real person. That girl hasn't said a word. She's just trying to enjoy her flight. Maybe take a look in the mirror before you blame someone else for your bad day." The woman opened her mouth to retort, but then stopped. Maybe it was the way the whole cabin had gone quiet. Maybe it was the fact that even the flight attendants were watching her now. Not with anger, but with disappointment. Whatever it was, she sank back into her seat and didn't speak again. But the damage was done. The girl couldn't relax. Every time the woman shifted or sighed, her shoulders tensed. She kept waiting for the next comment, the next glare, the next moment that would make her feel small again. Her stomach twisted. She wished they were already in Chicago. Wished she'd stayed home. Wished she looked different. Anything to avoid this, her father noticed. He didn't try to fix it with words this time. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I was going to give you this when we landed," he said softly. "But I think you need it now." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a new sketchbook, Thick paper, hardcover, the kind she'd pointed to in a store window months ago but never asked for because it was too expensive. On the front, in silver letters, it said, "For the artist who sees the world clearly." Tears finally came. Not big sobs, just quiet ones that rolled down her cheeks and landed on the cover. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but her father just handed her a napkin and said, "It's okay to feel it." Up front, the lead flight attendant watched the exchange. She'd been a flight attendant for 12 years. She'd seen all kinds of behavior. Drunk passengers, meltdowns over peanuts, arguments over reclining seats. But this was different. This was the kind of thing that stayed with you. Later, during a quiet moment in the galley, she pulled out her phone and typed a note to herself. Request anti-bias training refresher for crew. And maybe a policy update on handling discriminatory requests. Back in row 2, the girl opened her new sketchbook. On the first page, she drew a plane flying through a storm, but the windows were lit from inside, warm and golden. Safe. Her father watched her draw, his expression unreadable to anyone else. But if you knew him, if you'd seen the way his jaw tightened just slightly, the way his fingers tapped once against his knee, you'd know he was making a decision. He wasn't going to let this go. Not because he wanted revenge, but because his daughter deserved to walk through the world without having to prove she belonged. And if that meant using his voice, his position, his presence, then so be it. For now, though, he just sat beside her, a quiet wall between her and the storm across the aisle. And as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, carrying them toward a city of wind and steel and second chances, he made a silent promise. No one will make you feel invisible again. Not while I'm here. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane leveled off, signaling the start of the smooth cruising phase. Outside, the sun hung high, glinting off the wing like a signal flare. Most passengers had settled into their routines, some watching movies with tiny earbuds, others napping under thin airline blankets. But in row 2, the tension hadn't eased. It had just gone quiet, like a dog that stopped barking but still stood stiff-legged in the yard. The girl kept drawing. Her new sketchbook lay open on her tray table, and her pencil moved with more confidence now. Not frantic, not scared, but steady. She was sketching the curve of the airplane wing, the way it cut through the clouds like a knife through cotton. She added a tiny figure standing on the tip, arms outstretched, fearless. It wasn't realistic, but it felt true. Her father watched her for a moment, then turned his attention forward. He hadn't touched his book since takeoff. His hands rested on his knees, relaxed but ready, like a man who'd spent years learning how to stay calm in chaos. He knew the woman across the aisle wasn't done. People like her rarely were. They needed to feel in control, and when they couldn't get it one way, they'd try another. Sure enough, about 20 minutes into the flight, she stood again. This time, she didn't bother with the flight attendants. She walked straight to the front of the business cabin, where the lead attendant was organizing drink orders. Her voice carried clearly down the aisle. "I've had enough," she said, arms crossed, chin high. "I'm not staying in this seat if that child is going to be staring at me." It's unnerving. The lead attendant sighed quietly, then turned to face her fully. "Ma'am, she's been drawing the whole time. She hasn't looked at you once." "That's not the point," the woman snapped. "I shouldn't have to explain myself. I pay top dollar for this experience, and I expect to feel at ease. And you think moving a child who did nothing wrong will make you at ease?" The attendant's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one making this uncomfortable for everyone." A few passengers nodded. Someone in the back even said, "Preach." The woman's face tightened. She turned and marched back down the aisle. But instead of sitting, she stopped right beside the girl's seat. She leaned down slightly, just enough to be in her space, and said, voice low but sharp, "Some people need to learn their place." The girl froze. Her pencil hovered over the page. Her breath caught. That was it. Her father stood. He didn't slam his tray or raise his voice. He just rose slowly, deliberately, like a door closing after a long wait. The woman took a half step back, startled by the sudden movement. "You don't get to speak to my daughter like that," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the cabin like thunder rolling in from far away. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. "I was just," she started. "No," he cut in. "You weren't just anything. You've spent the last hour making my child feel like she's a problem for existing. You asked to have her seat removed. You muttered about safety. You insulted her to her face. And now you're standing over her like you own the air she breathes. Passengers were fully alert now. Phones came out, not to mock but to bear witness. A teenager whispered, "Go off, sir," under his breath. The woman tried to recover. "I have every right to express my concerns." "Concerns?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "This isn't concern. This is prejudice dressed up as discomfort, and I'm done letting it slide." Then, without drama, without flourish, he reached into his inside jacket pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, smooth from years of use, and flipped it open with one hand. Inside, gleaming under the cabin lights, was a gold badge. Below it, clear lettering, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "I'm a special agent with the FBI," he said, holding it just long enough for her and the passengers nearby to see. "And what you're doing right now? It's not just rude. On a commercial aircraft, which is federal property, creating a disturbance based on discriminatory behavior can be considered a federal offense." The woman's eyes locked onto the badge. Her mouth opened, then closed. All the color drained from her face. She looked like someone who just realized the ground beneath her wasn't solid after all. You can't be serious," she stammered. "I'm very serious," he said, closing the wallet and slipping it back into his pocket. "I could report this, file a formal complaint, have you met by federal air marshals upon landing. But I won't, because I believe in giving people a chance to do better." He paused, letting that sink in. "But understand this," he continued, voice softer now but no less firm. "My daughter is not the one who needs to change. She's kind. She's brilliant. She draws like she's got the whole world in her hands. And she deserves to sit anywhere she's paid for, anywhere in this country, without being treated like she's less than." The woman didn't say a word. She just turned and walked back to her seat, her heels clicking too fast now, like she was trying to outrun what just happened. The lead flight attendant appeared moments later, her expression a mix of relief and respect. "Sir," she said quietly. "Thank you." He nodded. "Just doing what's right." Then he sat back down. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide. Not scared anymore. Something else, awe maybe, or pride. She didn't speak, but she reached over and squeezed his hand. Hard. He squeezed back. Up front, the lead attendant spoke into her headset. A minute later, another attendant approached the woman in 2C with a polite smile. "Ma'am, we've arranged a seat for you in first class if you'd prefer more privacy." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't punishment. But it was a message. You don't get to stay here and make others suffer. The woman gathered her things quickly, magazine, purse, unopened wine, and followed without a word. As she passed row 2, she didn't look at the girl. Didn't look at the father. She kept her eyes straight ahead like she was walking through a room full of ghosts. The moment she was gone, the cabin seemed to exhale. A woman 2 rows back leaned over and said, "You okay, sweetie?" The girl nodded, offering a small smile. A man in a baseball cap gave a quiet thumbs up. "That was class," he said to the father. But the real shift happened in the girl herself. She sat up straighter. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, and this time she drew the badge, not shiny or dramatic, but simple, honest. Beneath it she wrote, "Protection looks like love." Her father saw it and didn't say anything, but his eyes got a little wet just for a second. The flight attendants moved through the cabin again, offering drinks and snacks. When they reached row 2, they lingered just a moment longer. "Can we get you anything?" one asked gently. The girl shook her head. "I'm good, thank you." But her father said, "Actually, could you bring her a hot chocolate? The real kind, if you have it." They did. And when the cup arrived, steaming with a tiny marshmallow floating on top, the girl wrapped her hands around it like it was a gift. Which in a way it was. Not just the drink, but the kindness behind it. The quiet solidarity. As she sipped, she watched the clouds drift past the window. They looked different now, softer, lighter. Like the sky itself had breathed a sigh of relief. Her father finally opened his book again. But he didn't read. He just held it in his lap, his other hand resting near hers, ready if she needed it. No one spoke much after that. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Like after a storm passes and the world feels washed clean. And in that quiet, the girl realized something. She hadn't shrunk. She hadn't disappeared. She'd stayed. And because of that, because her father stood up, because strangers spoke up, because she kept drawing even when her hands shook, she felt a little taller. Not because she'd won anything, but because she'd been seen, truly seen, and protected. And that, she thought as she took another sip of hot chocolate, was worth more than any seat on any plane. The rest of the flight passed in a kind of quiet calm that felt earned, not forced. The clouds outside drifted by like slow-moving thoughts, and the hum of the engines became a steady rhythm, almost like a lullaby. The girl finished her hot chocolate, set the empty cup aside, and went back to her sketchbook, not because she needed to escape, but because she wanted to remember. She drew the curve of the cabin window, the way the light hit the armrest, the gentle slope of her father's shoulder as he finally opened his book again. This time he actually read a few pages. A few rows ahead, the woman who'd caused all the trouble stayed in her new seat in first class. She didn't look back, didn't send glances. She just sat there, stiff and silent, like someone trying to pretend the last hour hadn't happened. No one paid her much mind. The energy in the cabin had shifted, and it wasn't about her anymore. About an hour before landing, a young woman in row 5 got up to use the restroom. On her way back, she paused by the girl's seat. She didn't say anything at first, just held out a folded piece of notebook paper. The girl looked up, surprised. "It's for you," the woman said softly with a small smile. "You're brave. Keep drawing." Then she walked back to her seat like it was no big thing. The girl unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, the words simple but warm. She read it twice, then tucked it carefully into the front pocket of her new sketchbook. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline, proof that someone saw her, really saw her, and thought she mattered. Her father noticed. He didn't comment, but the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. He knew moments like that could stick with a person longer than any lecture or apology. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the captain came on the intercom with the usual updates. Weather on the ground, estimated arrival time, thanks for flying. But this time when he said, "We hope you enjoyed your flight," it felt different, like he was talking directly to them. The lead flight attendant made her way back down the aisle one last time before landing. She stopped at row 2 and crouched slightly so she was at eye level with the girl. "I just want to say again, I'm really sorry you had to go through that," she said, voice low and sincere. "What happened wasn't right, and it's not how we want anyone to feel on our flights." The girl nodded. "Thank you." The attendant turned to the father. "We're reviewing our policies. Honestly, we've had situations like this before, but we haven't always handled them well." Your calm response, it showed us what real leadership looks like. He didn't puff up or take credit. "I just wanted my daughter to feel safe." "I know," she said. "And she should, always." She paused, then added, "If you're open to it, I'd love to connect you with someone from our customer experience team after we land. Not for complaints, but for ideas. We could use your perspective." He considered it, then nodded. "I'd be willing." She smiled, stood, and moved on. But not before giving the girl one last reassuring look. When the wheels touched down in Chicago, the cabin filled with the familiar sounds of seatbelts clicking open, overhead bins snapping shut, and tired travelers stretching after hours in the air. But as people gathered their things, something unusual happened. A few passengers lingered near row 2, not crowding, just waiting. One older man tapped the father lightly on the shoulder. "You handled that with real grace," he said. "My granddaughter's about her age. I hope someone would stand up for her the way you did." A college student stopped to say, "Your daughter's art is amazing. I saw her drawing earlier. She's got serious talent." Even the flight attendant who'd first been asked to move the girl came by. "I froze at first," she admitted quietly. "But seeing you stay firm, it taught me something." "Thank you." The girl kept her head down, cheeks warm, but she didn't shrink. She just held her sketchbook tighter and whispered, "Thank you," each time. Her father stayed close, letting her take it in at her own pace. He didn't rush her, didn't push. He knew this wasn't just about getting off a plane. It was about stepping into a new understanding of herself. They were among the last to leave the aircraft. As they walked down the jet bridge, the girl finally spoke. "Do you think she'll get in trouble?" Her father thought for a moment. "Probably not in the way you're thinking. I didn't file a report. I didn't call anyone. Sometimes the best consequence is just having to face what you've done, with no one to blame but yourself." She nodded slowly. But what if she does it again? Maybe she will, he said honestly. Or maybe today was the day it finally hit her, that her words hurt real people. We can't control that, but we can control how we respond. And today we responded with truth. That's enough. Outside the gate, airport staff waited. Not security, not police, but a customer relations representative from the airline, holding a tablet and wearing a concerned but professional expression. "Sir, ma'am," she said gently, "we received a report about an incident on your flight. We'd like to speak with you briefly if you're willing." They agreed. In a quiet corner near a coffee kiosk, she listened as the father described what happened, calmly, factually, without anger. The girl stayed close, sketchbook in hand, watching. When he finished, the representative sighed. "This is exactly why we're updating our crew training. We can't have passengers, especially children, made to feel unwelcome because of who they are." She offered them vouchers for future travel, but the father declined. "Don't give us free flights," he said. "Give your team better tools to handle this next time." "That's the real fix," she nodded, making notes. "We will." As they walked toward baggage claim, the girl finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since Atlanta. Why do people do that? Why do they look at me and see less? Her father stopped walking. He knelt slightly so they were eye to eye, right there in the middle of the bustling terminal. "Some people carry fear they don't understand," he said, "and instead of facing it, they point at others and say, 'You're the problem.' It's easier than looking in the mirror. But that's their burden, not yours." He stood again and put a hand on her shoulder. "You are whole. You are worthy. And you don't have to earn the right to take up space in this world. You already have it." She took a deep breath and nodded. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave her something to hold on to. At baggage claim, while they waited for their duffel bag to circle around, the girl opened her sketchbook one more time. On a fresh page, she drew two hands, one large, one small, gripping each other tightly. Above them, she wrote, "We stay." Her father saw it and didn't say a word, but he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Later that evening, back in their hotel room overlooking the Chicago River, the girl sat by the window with her sketchbook open, watching the city lights flicker to life. Her father ordered room service, her favorite pasta, and sat across from her, finally letting his guard down. "You did good today," he said. She looked up. "I didn't do anything. You stayed," he said simply. "You kept drawing. You listened. You held your head up. That's more than most adults could do." She smiled a little. Then, after a pause, "Can we come back here next year? For my birthday?" He laughed softly. "Only if you promise to draw the whole trip." "I will," she said. And for the first time since the flight, her voice sounded light. Free. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan rustled the trees along the riverbank. The city hummed with life. Cars, voices, music from a street performer blocks away. It was loud, messy, beautiful, and in that moment the girl didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged right here, right now, exactly as she was. Weeks passed. The flight faded into memory, not forgotten, but softened around the edges like a photograph left in sunlight too long. Life in their hometown settled back into its usual rhythm. School bells, homework, weekend errands, the smell of rain on pavement. But something had shifted inside the girl. She walked a little taller now, spoke a little clearer, and when kids at school made thoughtless comments about her hair, her skin, her quiet way, she didn't shrink. She'd just look them in the eye and say, "That's not okay," then walk away. Not angry, just firm, like she'd learned from watching someone who knew how to stand his ground without losing his kindness. Her sketchbook never left her side. She filled page after page, not just with clouds and cities, but with moments. A bus driver helping an elderly woman with her groceries, her science teacher staying late to explain a tough concept, her father reading on the couch, one hand resting on the dog's head. She was learning to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to her father. It was for her, thick paper, official-looking, with the logo of a local arts council in the corner. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was an invitation. They'd heard about her work through a passenger on the flight who happened to be a board member at a youth arts nonprofit. Someone had shared the story not for drama, but because they'd been moved by the girl's quiet strength and the art she'd created in the middle of it all. Now they were inviting her to submit a piece for a citywide exhibition called Voices That Rise. The theme was simple: tell a story only you can tell. She showed the letter to her father that night over dinner. He read it twice, then looked at her with that quiet pride that always made her chest feel warm. "You don't have to do it," he said, "but if you want to, I'll help you frame it." She did want to. For days she thought about what to draw. She sketched ideas, some angry, some sad, some hopeful, but none felt right. Then one rainy Saturday she sat by the window watching water slide down the glass, and it came to her. She didn't draw the woman. Didn't draw the argument. Didn't draw the badge. She drew the seat, just the window seat, empty except for a sketchbook lying open on the tray table. Outside the window, the sky was full of clouds, but one ray of sunlight broke through, hitting the seat like a spotlight. And in the reflection of the glass, barely visible, was the outline of a hand resting on a shoulder. In the corner of the page, in small, careful letters, she wrote the title, "The Seat That Stayed." When it was finished, she stepped back and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. It wasn't about winning. It was about claiming her place, about saying, "I was there, I mattered, and I didn't move." Her father helped her mount it in a simple black frame. On the day of the exhibition opening, they drove downtown together. The gallery was in an old brick building near the river, with high ceilings and soft lighting. Dozens of pieces lined the walls, paintings, photos, poems printed on canvas. Each one told a story of resilience, identity, hope. Hers was hung near the center of the main room. People stopped when they saw it. Some read the title and nodded slowly. Others stood in front of it for a long time, as if trying to step into the moment. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Is that a real plane?" Her mother knelt down. "It's a real story," she said. The girl stood off to the side, sipping punch from a plastic cup, watching it all unfold. She didn't expect to be recognized. She hadn't put her name on the piece, just a number. But then a woman approached her. She looked familiar. It took a moment to place her. The flight attendant from the airline, the one with the silver earrings. "I knew it was you," the woman said, smiling. "I'd recognize that sketchbook anywhere." They talked for a few minutes about the flight, about the changes the airline had made since then, new bias response training, clearer policies for crew, about how small moments can ripple outward in ways you never expect. Later, as the crowd thinned, the girl's father found her by the refreshment table. He didn't say much, just handed her a small box. Inside was a silver pendant, a tiny stylized artist's palette with a pencil through it. "For the next chapter," he said. She hugged him tight. Back home, life went on. But the story didn't end there. A local news station picked up the exhibition. They ran a short segment on young artists making a difference and included a shot of the seat that stayed. They didn't name the girl, respecting her privacy, but they told the story behind the art in general terms. A young traveler faced prejudice mid-flight, stayed strong and turned pain into something beautiful. Online, the story spread, not in a viral, sensational way, but quietly, steadily. Teachers shared it with students. Parents talked about it at dinner tables. A high school in another state even used it in a lesson about bystander intervention and allyship. The woman from the flight? She was never named. Never shamed publicly. But months later, the airline quietly confirmed that she'd written a letter, not to complain, but to apologize. She asked that it be passed along to the family if they were willing. They weren't ready to accept it yet, but her father kept it. Not because he forgave her, but because it showed that change, however slow, was possible. What mattered most, though, wasn't the attention or the apology. It was what happened in classrooms, in airports, in everyday moments. After that, a flight attendant in Dallas used the story in a training session to show how to support passengers facing bias. A librarian in Ohio added books about courage and identity to her Young Voices shelf. And a girl in Minnesota, after seeing a photo of the artwork online, started her own sketchbook with a note on the first page, "I belong here too." Months turned into a year. The girl turned 15. She entered another art contest. She joined the school newspaper. She even gave a short talk at a youth leadership event about using creativity to respond to hurt, not with more hurt, but with truth. Her father still carried a pencil in his jacket pocket. just in case. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, she asked, "Do you think that day changed her?" He thought for a long time. Maybe, maybe not. But it changed you. And that's what matters, she smiled. It changed me for the better. Yes, he said. It did. And in that quiet moment, with crickets singing and the sky turning deep purple, the girl knew something for sure. She wasn't defined by what someone else thought of her. She was defined by what she chose tying.